3 billion human lives ended on August 29, 1997. The survivors of the nuclear fire called the war Judgment Day. They lived only to face a new nightmare, the war against the machines.
The Terminator franchise has some of the most unique ideas and lore across all of popular science fiction. A future war, time travel, murderous machines, and the shifting of destiny are all incredibly interesting and massive topics to write about, and they're all fundamental to the world building and lore of Terminator. Stories involving these concepts existed prior to the release, of course, of the first film. Sci-fi writer Harlan Ellison even attempted to sue James Cameron for plagiarizing the idea from him, but no other piece of earlier work masters them all the same way that the Terminator does. The first two films are great examples of near-perfect cinema. It's funny, we were talking about Aliens recently, and while I prefer the more subdued original Alien to Aliens, both fantastic movies of course, Terminator 2 for me is a pretty big step up on the first one. As a kid, I was actually a lot less frightened of the Terminator itself than I was of the machine war hellscape brought to Earth. For more of that, by the way, from a different franchise, watch my video on the Animatrix. But back on topic, everything that came after T2 just hasn't been as good, and you can see through the multiple attempts to reboot or refresh the timeline every couple of years that they know it. That's the topic of today's video though, the Terminator timeline, or timelines, starting from the very beginning. Now, I want to go in as chronological of an order as we can, though given the use of time travel, it will be a little all over the place no matter what. The core concept and major event in the Terminator franchise is, of course, Judgment Day, a date which changes multiple times throughout the series. On Judgment Day, AI goes live and starts a nuclear war which wipes out most of humanity, with the remainder fighting an army of machines created by the AI known as Terminators. Now that that's out of the way, our first date of note is May 12th, 1984. A newly built Terminator, the T-800, is sent back from the year 2029 in a mission to assassinate a woman named Sarah Connor. The same day, a human resistance soldier, Kyle Reese, arrives in search of the same woman. After Reese intervenes in an attack from the T-800, he explains the backstory of Judgment Day in this timeline. On August 29th, 1997, Cyberdyne Systems develops an AI security program called Skynet, which will become self-aware, deem humanity as a threat to its existence, and start a nuclear war to wipe out the human population. In the following years, the remaining humans resist the machines under the leadership of John Connor, Sarah Connor's unborn son. On July 11, 2029, Connor leads a final assault on the machines. However, Skynet had a contingency plan utilizing time displacement in order to assassinate Sarah Connor before the birth of her son. This gets us into the two fundamental rules of time travel in this franchise. One, only organic material can be sent through time. This is why Skynet needs to send a T-800. They were designed using organic tissue, allowing them to serve as infiltration units in addition to enduring the effects of time travel. That's also why they're naked, aside from the fact, of course, that Arnold is a total monster. Anyway, the second rule is that time displacement equipment is stationary, so time travel only works one way. Once you travel through time, you're stuck there. Which is also a big problem for the humans in this situation, as there's no proof that any of this insanity is actually happening, at least until the Terminator starts going ape, surviving shotgun blasts. Sarah eventually believes Reese's story, and the two get together, conceiving John. Now, this adds, of course, an interesting wrinkle to the timeline, creating the idea that everything that has led to the future war with Skynet essentially starts with this paradox, something expanded upon in T2. John is essentially responsible for his own conception, creating the idea that fate isn't written within this universe. However, it is very, very difficult to change. Sarah is given all the pieces she needs to continue along her path, a path which also will allow John to become the great military leader humanity needs him to become. There are also theories which suggest the idea that Sarah herself could have become the resistance leader if Reese never showed up, or that the guy who calls to cancel on Sarah's date would have been John's father, and yeah, you could dissect any possibility there. However, for the sake of simplicity, we are going to assume that the future John Connor will have the information that Kyle Reese is his father and knowingly planted the seeds of Reese's infatuation with Sarah in order to send him to not just protect his mother, but also ensure his own conception and future training, which is kind of wild. Personally, I couldn't do it. Let the machines kill me. But there's also an element of like the butterfly effect to talk about. Presumably, if the machines were successful in killing Sarah, it would have destroyed their future timeline and spawned a new one. So those specific machines in that version of Skynet probably would have been destroyed. But I mean, that's part of the fun of the franchise being so mind-bending. Anyway, the events of Terminator 1 culminate with the sacrifice of Kyle Reese and the destruction of the earliest known T-800 in this timeline. Over the next 10 years, Sarah Connor will give birth to John and begin training him to become humanity's savior, while also attempting to prevent Judgment Day in the first place. During this time, the remains of the T-800 are also discovered by Cyberdyne, who begin reverse engineering the tech to create their own advanced microprocessor with Miles Dyson, a cybernetics expert and Cyberdyne's director of special projects. In the lead up to Judgment Day, Sarah attempts to destroy the offices of an unnamed computer company before being apprehended, which places John in foster care. In 1995, a new Terminator known as the T-1000 arrives from the year 2029 to kill John Connor. It is later explained that this was essentially Skynet's Plan C. If the 1984 T-800 failed, the 1995 T-1000 acted as insurance to finish the job. Future John Connor, who would have already sent Reese to 1984, is already aware of their plan and prepares a reprogrammed T-800 to go back to 1995 to protect his younger self. After being chased by the T-1000, both John and the T-800 break Sarah out of a psychiatric hospital, with Sarah then utilizing the T-800's knowledge of the future to determine that Miles Dyson and Cyberdyne will be the creators of Skynet. After an attempted assassination of Dyson, he is convinced that his work will lead to a doomed future for humanity. Before the T-800 explains that Judgment Day is inevitable as long as Cyberdyne has the research and remains from the original Terminator. The trio break into Cyberdyne's laboratory in an attempt to destroy the facility, along with, of course, its research and the remains of the first T-800 and the new T-1000. Dyson sacrifices himself to ensure that Judgment Day is prevented before the total destruction of the T-1000 and the new friendly T-800. This creates the first big branch of the timeline and is where things are honestly going to get confusing. The initial timeline is where Judgment Day happens in 97 and the humans win in 2029. Our first altered timeline is set up with the third movie, Rise of the Machines. The pieces are put into place right after the aftermath of Cyberdyne's destroyed lab. Sarah Connor is diagnosed with leukemia before passing in 1997 with the appearances of an averted Judgment Day. During that time, however, Cyberdyne goes bankrupt and all research is continued by a division of the U.S. Army known as Cyber Research Systems, headed by Lieutenant General Robert Brewster, the father of Kate, one of John's former classmates. In either 2003 or 2004, we never get an exact date, with a lot of the expanded material alternating between both years. Let's say 2004, that's what the novelization and early screenplays say. A prototype Terminator known as TX arrives from 2032. In a chance meeting, John reunites with Kate Brewster before both are hunted by the TX and meet the T-850. It is explained that Judgment Day is inevitable and attempts to prevent it will only be met with a delay, and that the TX was not sent after John, but instead a list of his lieutenants, including Kate. It's also revealed that the T-850 was sent by Kate to protect her past self and John, as in this future, John and Kate will marry, with John no longer being humanity's last hope. He will die at the hands of the T-850 before Kate reprograms it to ensure their survival during Judgment Day, which is now scheduled to start in a few hours. In one last hope to prevent Judgment Day, the three go to CRS in an attempt to convince General Brewster not to activate the nearly complete Skynet, now a military program. They fail, and the bombs start dropping, indicating the start of the machine war, and securing that the fate of humanity lies in John and Kate. This acts as a new timeline since many of the couple's allies are now dead. So the potential future of 2032 we were aware of now no longer happens. It also creates a continuity issue with Terminator Salvation, since Cyberdyne is now the creator of Skynet once again, and CRS just isn't mentioned, but many additional elements of Rise of the Machines do carry over. This means that the Salvation timeline is also in its own separate offshoot of the ending of T2, where Cyberdyne never goes bankrupt and continues Dyson's research, culminating in Judgment Day, though Kate and John end up meeting in this alternate timeline as well, later marrying after the war begins. In this new timeline, though, a death row inmate named Marcus donates his body to Cyberdyne research, prior to his execution, which is shortly followed by Judgment Day. Over the next 15 years, John rises in the ranks of the human resistance and realizes that Skynet is developing the plans for the T-800 earlier than he anticipated, along with the information that Kyle Reese will eventually father John. The Connors soon meet Marcus, who has been imbued with cybernetic enhancements but still believes he is a human. They later encounter a prototype of the T-800 who attempts to kill John, though he's saved by the sacrifice of Marcus. The Salvation timeline, along with the two following timelines, don't have actual endings, as they were intended to set up additional follow-ups, which will likely never see the light of day, and that's probably fine. So we're making a big leap to our next alternate timeline, Genisys. Back in the original 2029, prior to John sending Kyle Reese back to 1984, their unit was infiltrated by an advanced Terminator known as the T-5000. The T-5000 is the physical embodiment of Skynet. Nobody is sure where it came from or how it was created, but the best guess is that it was from a possible future where Skynet loses, and this is their ultimate contingency. The T-5000 infects John Connor with a nanovirus containing machine phase matter and turns John into the first T-3000. Also, talking about Alien earlier, these are some Alien vibes, but this attack coincides with Kyle being sent to 1984, leading to a fracture in the timeline. This version of Kyle Reese is from a future which no longer exists, and now has memories from both timelines. The fracture has caused all the events to shift. When the first T-800 arrives in 1984, it is quickly disabled by a very different Sarah Connor and her own T-800 named Pops. It's explained that Pops was sent back to 1973 to save a young Sarah from a new T-1000. Both of them come from the new future created from the timeline fracture, though the identity of who sent Pops was wiped to prevent Skynet from finding out and presumably trying some shit in the future. That question probably would have been answered in a sequel, but now we will likely never find out. Sarah and Pops lead Kyle to their base, where they have been constructing their own time displacement machine to take them to 97 in order to prevent Judgment Day, but Kyle realizes that Judgment Day has actually moved forward to 2017 because of alterations in the timeline. They travel to the year and realize that Judgment Day is still to come. They interact with the T-3000 / John Connor, who was sent back after Reese to ensure Cyberdyne will develop a more advanced version of Skynet known as Genisys. The T-3000 is destroyed, Judgment Day is postponed again, Kyle Reese visits his younger self to ensure the information about Genisys is planted, and the three return to 84, where the story just kinda ends. Genisys is revealed to still exist, but as we already said, it's unlikely we'll be returning to this timeline to figure out what happened. The final timeline is Dark Fate. This one spins right off of the ending of Terminator 2. It suggests that when the original group of Terminators were sent back to 84 and 95, Skynet actually sent a second T-800 to 95, though due to the complicated and random effects of time displacement, actually appeared on the other side of the planet and was thus unable to arrive in time to participate in the events of T2. After Cyberdyne went under, however, this Terminator was stranded in the timeline without Skynet and only a mission to terminate John Connor. He tracks down Sarah and John 3 years after the event of T2 and assassinates John in front of Sarah before disappearing. And yeah, someone probably should have used time travel to prevent this scene from being made. I mean, it's well executed, I think, visually, but very controversial for a good reason. Anyway, although he disappeared, this Terminator didn't just shut down, and over the next 22 years, actually develops consciousness and the machine equivalent of empathy, allowing him to connect and take care of a family, similar to what the T-800 from T2 and Pops were able to eventually develop, and this created a new purpose and allowed him to anonymously help Sarah detect any Terminators in the present, further ensuring that Judgment Day will never happen. In 2020, a new Terminator called Rev 9 is sent back from 2042 on a mission to terminate a new character named Danny Ramos. Intervening is another future soldier with cybernetic enhancements named Grace and the reappearance of Sarah Connor. Grace explains that she comes from another future timeline that was created after the destruction of Cyberdyne and prevention of Skynet. In this reality, a new AI, Legion, goes live on an undetermined date, and a new but similar Judgment Day goes into effect. Over the next few days, the T-800, now known as Carl, and Rev 9 are both destroyed, with Grace sacrificing herself to save Danny. Danny and Sarah drive off together to prepare for an unknown future that will hopefully never revisit. And these are each of the current mainstream Terminator timelines. Well, at least this is the easiest way to explain them for now. If this video does well and Terminator 0 proves to be a hit with fans, which, by the way, I'm enjoying, I'd like to come back to break down the television timelines as well. We haven't had one Summer Glau mention in this video, but as you can see, the Terminator franchise is a mess right now, but it's a series which almost relishes its messy timelines. The war being fought throughout time opens up so many different possibilities for the franchise to follow as we go on, and while I don't really love some of the later sequels, there are so many ways which future entries can add to and expand upon the story without erasing what works. I do think Terminator needs just one really good, high-quality sequel detached from everything else to right the ship. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours, of course, down below.